Welcome to the show, Dr. Dayan.
Hi, Aaron. Thank you for having me on the show. Good to be here.
Doctor, did you have any chance to go through the report released by?
Yes. In fact, I wrote a column about it in the Daily FT, my regular weekly column, and today there's a full page uh, of my analysis.
Uh, uh, Prior to this report, you gave an interview to Birakesari's journalist Ram, and you have
Yes.
mentioned in that interview said this present administration will realize the gravity of the situation in the upcoming Geneva. Is it represented in the report, Doctor?
Oh, yes, most certainly, because I have experience with the reports of various high commissioners, and this report is very different. It is not only critical, it is very seriously critical, and it talks about some very disturbing trends. It also makes suggestions and recommendations that are more radical than any other report by UN High Commission of Human Rights on Sri Lanka so far. So it's very serious, and it's a deep report. It has to be studied very seriously.
Doctor, why do you think that UNHRC hardened its stance?
I think that's very clear when you actually read the report, because the High Commissioner has focused on what she says are 6 disturbing trends in Sri Lanka in the recent past. And every one of those trends is to do with something that took place, or a policy that has been initiated, a dynamic that has been initiated under the presidency of Gotabaya Rajapaksa. The main thrust of the report is twofold. One is accountability, that's very well known. And that's old, it's not new, that's old. But there is a stepping up of the recommendations, the mention of the ICC, etc. But the second prong of the report is on militarization and the dangers, the shrinkage of democratic and civic space. It's to do with governance issues, and more than that, it's to do with changes that are structural, even changes that are systemic, that are changes in the system. She mentions militarization, how the military has taken control of areas that were civilian administered. She has mentioned the drawing in of certain other areas into the defense ministry's control. She has talked about the exclusionary, sort of majoritarian ideology. And several of these points, she has itemized 6, but she keeps coming back to the same point many times. That is new and that is very serious, because she is saying something is happening in Sri Lanka which is very negative, which can result in a massive violation of human rights and a return to the causes of the original conflict. So I study that through the lens of political science, and I can see that she's doing something new, she's saying something new, she's drawing attention to something new, because even during the war, nobody was questioning the democratic character of the Sri Lankan state. But she's now saying that the Sri Lankan state is being changed by militarization. And she describes those things. She names, she gives the numbers of institutions and departments that have been taken under the Ministry of Defense. She gives the number of places that were held by professional civilian administrators, which have now been given to military or ex-military administrators. She talks about the presidential task forces, which have military and police and ex-military personnel. So the process of militarization is multidimensional. And she has brought the world's attention to bear on that. And it has brought those trends to the attention of the world. And this is a very significant thing. You cannot avoid the conclusion that her Latin American background, she was twice the president of Chile. And Chile, as you know, had one of the worst, most notorious military dictatorships in our lifetime, the dictatorship of General Augusto Pinochet. And her own father, who was a general, was tortured and killed by the fascist military junta because he stood for democracy and he supported President Salvador Allende. So I think that Michelle Bachelet is looking at the subject with all the knowledge and bitter experience that she has had as a Democrat and a socialist, a political activist, and later a president of an important Latin American country which went through the experience of military rule. And she can see things that many of us may not be able to see. And she is focusing a spotlight on that aspect of what is going on in Sri Lanka. I would say that it is for that reason that there is a stepping up, even on accountability, because she is talking about a military machine which has not been cleaned up of those elements who may have committed human rights violations. And this machine, she sees, has been given more and more control over the country in more and more sectors by the political leadership. That is why she is trying to balance it by bringing up accountability issues which concern the top level of the military machine, or the former top level, which has now moved into government and state administration. These are the two aspects. It is because she sees the threat to democracy and to democratic space, to civic space, from a process of militarization and from a process of increasing ethnocentrism and majoritarianism, that she has said it is best to put the focus on the issue of accountability in order to try to bring more international scrutiny and to contain this situation that she has described in her report.
Doctor, what you, from your viewpoint, I can take a sense that she has so far her recommendations and statements are far-reaching than the previous high commissioners. Previous high commissioners also made some startling statements, but there is a perception among the people that UNHRC cannot do much beyond making these kind of statements. But from here on, what can happen?
Well, you're right. There are some people who think so. I think this government thinks so. May I correct myself? By this government, I don't mean the majority of the cabinet and the prime minister. Those who are in parliament understand these things better because they are experienced politicians who have dealt with the international community before. I'm really talking about the regime, that stratum of the president and officials who are mostly ex-military. I think they think that, well, this is non-binding, is not a problem, who cares, they will say something. This view is not limited to the president or his inner circle. I remember the period of the previous government, the Yahapalana government, I was the first to speak out publicly against the 2015 resolution and the co-sponsorship by the then government. But on those panels with me, there were those who said, oh, what is this resolution? We can just ignore this. This is nothing. What is this UNHRC? They were taking the same line that President Donald Trump later took about the UNHRC. And even Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel took. That is of contempt towards the UNHRC. But I think that they are making a big mistake. Because these militarist hardliners do not understand the importance of moral legitimacy in international politics. They look at it in a very narrow way, what can be done to us? What does it matter? UNHRC will say something. They have no ability to enforce. So they look at it only in terms of hard power. But that's not the way the world works at all. Once the High Commissioner's report gets out, and it has already begun to come out, then global opinion gets impacted. Michelle Bachelet is very respected across the north-south or east-west divide because she's a president, two-time president of an important country of the global south, Chile. She was a socialist leader. Nobody can accuse her of being a tool of imperialism or, northern hegemony. She carries a lot of moral weight. And the way the world begins to see the Sri Lankan regime and even the Sri Lankan state will be impacted by the High Commissioner's report, which is not an amateurish report. It's a serious report. And this report itself has recommendations. If those recommendations are acted on, then the consequences for the Sri Lankan regime are extremely negative. There's no question of dismissing it. Once this goes out, if what the High Commissioner has recommended is taken up in parliaments in other parts of the world, in senates such as the United States, if people start filing cases, which she has in fact recommended, that cases be filed under the doctrine of universal jurisdiction. If that happens, it will not be possible to stop it, because that is outside the control of the Sri Lankan regime.
Is there any precedents? This happened in previous cases, any other countries?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. It has. Of course it has. I mean, starting with, this is very interesting, the case of the former president of the country that Michelle Bachelet later became the president of, Chile. Her father was tortured and killed, as I said. He was a general. Tortured and killed by the head of the military dictatorship, Augusto Pinochet. Long after Pinochet was toppled from power, and he had lost an election, but he had put certain provisions into the constitution where he could not be prosecuted. He was caught in London, where he had come for medical attention, and he was detained for quite a period. That was done under a ruling given in Spain, another country, not Chile, not even Britain, by a judge who became famous because of the judgment, Judge Balthazar Gazon. I met him in Moscow when I was ambassador in Moscow. He was at a conference in Moscow. He was very respected. He's respected throughout the world. And I shook hands with him and I thanked him and I congratulated him on his decision and his doctrine. His point, this doctrine of universal jurisdiction, that is something that the present Sri Lankan regime will find it very difficult to understand because it goes against their philosophy. But I think that doctrine is a very important doctrine. The doctrine says that there are certain types of crimes that are so bad that violate the humanity of people that you can't limit the search for justice only to that country, because people who do that change the laws, put in judges, and make sure that they never get punished. But human rights means that all human beings have certain inalienable rights. And if you violate those in a serious way, then that crime cannot be limited. It's a crime against humanity. You can't limit that to your borders. Wherever in the world you are, any court has the right, any court, to rule against you. A case can be heard and a ruling can be given. That is the doctrine of universal jurisdiction, that there are certain things that are so evil that it transcends the borders of countries. Now, Balthazar Gazon made that judgment in Spain because Pinochet had violated the human rights of some Spanish citizens. But it later became a globally accepted doctrine. So, when the Israeli foreign minister at that time, Zippy Livni, lady, who is a friend of Britain, was flying through Britain, she couldn't get out of the plane at the airport because some citizen filed a case and the court said, yes, she is guilty of certain, at least there is a case to be heard under universal jurisdiction for something that happened in Gaza. And she couldn't even step onto the soil of Britain. So this is not a joke. If cases are filed, of course, if they are thrown out like Donald Trump's silly cases, then it discredits the whole purpose. But if serious cases are filed in countries, and Michelle Bachelet has appealed to, actually, she has said that member states should do this. She has urged that under universal jurisdiction, such cases be filed. So there are 193 members of United Nations, member states. If there are serious cases filed in these countries, what is to stop the same thing happening to a Sri Lankan personality? They won't be able to go to those countries, and not only will they not be able to go to those countries, if the courts say that they are guilty, then other processes start rolling. She has also talked about the International Criminal Court. So this is very serious. Anybody who dismisses the UN Human Rights Council and the Office of the High Commissioner and the statement of the report of the High Commissioner simply does not know how the world works. They will live
Doctor,
in a different era.
my final question, Doctor. If I remember correct, Field Marshal Fonseca, while making a speech in Parliament, said he and several uh, ex-military personnel cannot get visas to countries like USA because of these allegations, war crimes allegations. And he said, for the good of everything, this has to come to an end. They need to find a closure to this. So what needs to be done in order to get out of this situation, to find a amicable or find a solution to this Geneva issue?
Well, the Geneva issue is really a Colombo issue. It's not a Geneva issue. Certain changes in behavior have to take place in Colombo. Now, the report this time, as I said, is mainly about the erosion of democracy and the spread of militarization and of an ideology that marginalizes the minorities in Sri Lanka, especially in the past year. So if the government or the leadership stops doing that and rolls back those negative trends, then they'll have less pressure in Geneva. Then there are obvious things like the fact that Hejaz Hezbollah has not been brought to courts and charged. Now, I'm not saying he's innocent. I'm not saying he's guilty. I don't know. But I do know that you shouldn't keep a person locked up for 9 months without bringing him or her to trial. And you certainly should not, if you're the president, do what our president has done, which is to pardon a former soldier who was convicted and his appeal thrown out by the Supreme Court for the crime of cutting the throat of a 5-year-old Tamil child. Now, when you do that, you have problems in Geneva. And maybe not only in Geneva, if somebody acts on the High Commissioner's conclusions and recommendations. So you have to clean up your act at home first in order to tackle the problem in Geneva. The second thing is about accountability. Everybody knows what has to be done. I did not believe when I was serving as ambassador in Geneva, and I do not believe up till now that there was anything remotely like genocide or ethnic cleansing or intentional committing by the army as a whole as policy of war crimes and crimes against humanity from the point of view of the system. I'm not saying there weren't war crimes and crimes against humanity, but if there were, these were incidents, specific incidents, which can be named. Now, there's a choice. Do you say we are not accountable to anybody, we do whatever we like is correct, and this is our island, and take the stand that this regime is taking? Or do you follow through on what was recommended to you by the commissions that you appointed? The government of that time appointed the LLRC, which produced a report in 2011. Then there were other commissions like the Paranagama Sir Desmond De Silva Commission. Now, all those commissions appointed during President Mahinda Rajapaksa's time clearly said there were crimes. These are the crimes. The LLRC report lists it. The LLRC report is 100 pages, which very clearly argues that there was no policy and no system-wide committing of crimes against humanity during the war. But it also lists, I think, about 10 or 11 specific instances where it says you had to have an independent inquiry into these, what look like crimes, like disappearances of people who surrendered, like the Trincomalee 5, like the ACF. Now, Sir Desmond De Silva's report, which the Tamil diaspora did not like, but the Sinhalese hardliners didn't like it either, because he gives several alternatives for robust, independent accountability inquiries. He says these are the ways in which you can do that. And you can get foreign forensic expertise. He gives the options. This country did this, the other country did the other. These are the options. So it's all known. It's not a mystery. It's that from the LLRC onwards, the hardliners in the defense establishment at that time, and the most senior is now the president of Sri Lanka, obstructed the implementation of those recommendations concerning robust accountability hearings. which were domestic. So if you don't do it domestically, then somebody says you have to do it internationally, which is what Michelle Bachelet has now said. So that's a situation that was created by those who opposed and did not implement and dismantled and diluted a strong, independent, credible domestic inquiry. Someday we will have to do that. But that will have to be done soon because there's pressure which cannot be contained otherwise. And that pressure is now going international with the High Commissioner's report. There's no rolling that back unless it's like, unless you use the vaccination. And the vaccination is the truth that you have to someday investigate these independently. I say someday because I don't expect this regime to do so. I'm not saying the whole government will not, but this particular leadership and this structure, this network, they won't do that. It goes against their ideology. So right now, the most serious danger to the Sri Lankan state and the armed forces comes from inside, because by refusing to do certain things, the armed forces, including the people appointed by the president, former military people in the state, come under international scrutiny and maybe even prosecution, which is needless. But it is because of the behavior and the policies and the attitude of the regime itself. So there is, maybe I wouldn't say for the first time, but there is a clear contradiction between the interests of Sri Lanka as a country, the interests of the Sri Lankan state, and the interests of the Sri Lankan armed forces on the one hand, and the ultra-nationalist, isolationist mindset and policies of the regime on the other hand.
Thank you very much, Doctor, for your thoughts and your excellent opinion. And thank you for participating in our show for the first time. And I'm
Thank you,
looking
Arun.
forward to continue this kind of discussion in the future as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.